Two patrol cars, lights flashing, surrounding a 12-year-old black boy sitting on his bicycle in the middle of an upscale neighborhood. The boy's hands are shaking as he grips the handlebars, his eyes wide with terror. Standing just a few feet away is Mrs. Patricia Williams, a 55-year-old white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp designer blouse. Her arms crossed defiantly across her chest as she points an accusing finger at the child. "I know he stole that bike." Patricia's voice cuts through the tense silence. Kids like him don't own bikes that expensive. The camera captures the boy's face, tears beginning to well up in his eyes as he looks around desperately, searching for help that seems nowhere to be found. The sound of footsteps approaching grows louder, each step echoing with authority. Polished black police boots come into view, then a gleaming badge, and finally, the face of a woman in uniform. This is Police Chief Angela Thompson, 42 years old, with a commanding presence that immediately shifts the energy of the entire scene. Patricia's confident expression begins to crumble as she looks up at the approaching officer. Her mouth falls open slightly, and in a barely audible whisper she breathes, "Oh my God." What happened next will leave you absolutely speechless. But first, let me tell you how we got here, because this is much more than a bike, a phone call, and a case of mistaken identity. This is about assumptions, prejudice, and a mother's worst nightmare becoming reality in broad daylight. 3 weeks before this confrontation would change everything, 12-year-old Marcus Thompson was living every kid's dream of earning something through pure determination and hard work. Marcus wasn't just any ordinary sixth grader. For months, he'd been walking past Miller's bike shop on his way home from school, pressing his face against the window glass, staring at that beautiful red and black mountain bike displayed in the center of the store. The bike wasn't just a want for Marcus, it was a symbol of freedom, of independence, and of what you could achieve when you set your mind to something. The price tag read $450, which might as well have been $4,000 to a 12-year-old with no allowance and parents who believed in earning what you wanted. So Marcus got creative. He started small, asking Mrs. Henderson next door if he could carry her groceries from her car to her kitchen for $2. When Mr. Patel down the street mentioned his lawn was getting out of hand, Marcus showed up the next Saturday morning with his mom's old push mower, offering to cut it for $10. Word spread quickly in their neighborhood that Marcus Thompson was a reliable, polite young man who took pride in his work. Every single dollar Marcus earned went into a mason jar he kept on his bedroom dresser. $5 for helping the elderly Mr. Rodriguez clean out his garage. $8 for walking the Johnsons' dog every day for a week while they were out of town. $15 for spending an entire Saturday helping his neighbor paint her fence. Week after week, Marcus watched that jar fill up, counting and recounting his earnings every night before bed. The day Marcus finally had enough money saved, he could barely contain his excitement. He burst through the front door of their home on Maple Street, the mason jar clutched in both hands, practically vibrating with joy as he called out to his mother. "Mom! Mom, I did it! I have enough!" Marcus announced, his voice echoing through their modest but warm home. Chief Angela Thompson emerged from the kitchen, still in her police uniform from her shift, and the smile that spread across her face when she saw her son's excitement could have lit up the entire neighborhood. She knelt down to Marcus's level, looking into his bright, determined eyes as he poured out the contents of that mason jar onto their dining room table. "I'm so proud of your hard work, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she helped him count out the crumpled bills and scattered coins. "That bike represents your dedication, your perseverance, and your character. You've earned every single dollar of this money." The next day, Marcus and his mother walked hand in hand into Miller's bike shop, where Marcus proudly handed over his hard-earned cash and watched as his dream bike was wheeled out from the display window. The shop owner, Mr. Miller, had watched Marcus's face pressed against his window for months and was genuinely moved by the story of how this young man had saved every penny. But here's where our story takes a turn, because while Marcus was learning the value of hard work and determination, just a few neighborhoods over, a very different story was unfolding in the mind of Patricia Williams. Patricia Williams was 55 years old, recently divorced, and struggling with a sense of powerlessness that she didn't quite know how to handle. 6 months earlier, she'd moved to Willowbrook Heights, an upscale neighborhood with tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and property values that she mentioned in nearly every conversation she had with her new neighbors. Patricia told herself she'd moved here for safety and property values, but the truth was more complicated than that. Growing up in the 1970s and 80s, Patricia had lived in a racially diverse neighborhood where her parents had filled her young mind with subtle but persistent racist comments disguised as concern for safety and property values. Those childhood messages had taken root deep in her subconscious, growing into fears and prejudices that she'd never confronted or questioned as an adult. Her recent divorce had left Patricia feeling like her life was spinning out of control. She'd lost her sense of purpose, her financial security, and her identity as a married woman in suburban America. In her new neighborhood, calling out suspicious activity and posting in the Willowbrook Safety Facebook group gave her a sense of control and importance that she desperately craved. Every morning, Patricia's routine was the same. Coffee first, black with 1 sugar, then straight to her living room window, where she'd position herself behind the sheer curtains with her phone in hand, scanning the street for anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of normal. A delivery truck that stayed too long, kids walking through who didn't look like they belonged, anyone or anything that disrupted her sense of order and control. Patricia had become the self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook Heights, though nobody had asked her to take on this role. In her mind, she was protecting her investment, her safety, and her community. In reality, she was feeding her own fears and prejudices while convincing herself she was doing good. Now about the woman whose life was about to intersect with both Marcus and Patricia in the most dramatic way possible. Chief Angela Thompson represented everything that Patricia claimed to support: law and order, community safety, and strong family values. But Patricia would never have imagined that the police chief she'd voted for, supported, and praised in community meetings was a black woman raising her son just 2 streets away. Angela Thompson's journey to becoming police chief hadn't been easy. 20 years earlier, she'd started as a beat cop in a department that wasn't exactly welcoming to young black women who had the audacity to think they could change things from within. She'd faced discrimination, harassment, and constant pressure to either conform or quit. But Angela had a different vision. She believed that real change in policing could only happen when people who understood the community's pain and mistrust were in positions to make decisions. She'd worked her way up through every rank, earning respect through her dedication, her fairness, and her unwavering commitment to serving all members of her community equally. Angela had moved to Willowbrook Heights specifically because she wanted Marcus to grow up in a safe neighborhood with good schools, where he could ride his bike freely and focus on being a kid instead of worrying about the dangers she'd seen in her 20 years of police work. She'd saved for years to afford the down payment on their house, and every morning when she kissed Marcus goodbye and reminded him to text her when he arrived safely at his friend's house, she felt grateful that she could provide this kind of life for her son. That morning at the police station, Chief Thompson was reviewing community policing initiatives, discussing with her officers the importance of building trust between police and residents, especially in diverse communities where historical tensions ran deep. She emphasized again and again that their job was to serve and protect everyone, regardless of race, class, or background. If you're finding this story as compelling as I think you are, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one, where truth is stranger and justice takes unexpected forms, are exactly what we bring you every single day on this channel. And tell me in the comments section from what part of the world you're watching from right now. But here's what I want you to think about as we continue. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes, standing there as a 12-year-old facing these accusations? Because while Marcus was getting ready to take his first ride through Willowbrook Heights on his brand new bike, and while Chief Thompson was at the station discussing community trust, Patricia Williams was settling in behind her living room curtains with her morning coffee, completely unaware that she was about to make a decision that would expose the ugly truth about her own biases in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. It was a beautiful Saturday morning when Marcus Thompson decided to take his brand new mountain bike for its first real ride through Willowbrook Heights. The sun was shining, there was a gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees that lined the pristine streets, and Marcus felt like he was on top of the world. This wasn't just any bike ride, this was freedom on two wheels, powered by 3 months of hard work and determination. As Marcus pedaled slowly down Elm Street, taking in the beautiful homes with their perfectly manicured lawns and flower gardens, he spotted something that made him smile. There, lounging in a patch of morning sunlight, it was a golden retriever with a red collar, clearly belonging to one of the neighborhood families. Marcus had always loved dogs, and this one looked particularly friendly. He stopped his bike and walked over to the fence, making soft clicking sounds with his tongue. The dog immediately perked up and trotted over, tail wagging enthusiastically. Marcus gently reached through the fence slats to pet the dog's soft fur, laughing as the golden retriever tried to lick his fingers through the fence. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Marcus said softly, his voice filled with the pure joy that only a 12-year-old experiencing perfect freedom could possess. "I bet you'd love to go for a bike ride, too." But what Marcus didn't know was that he was being watched. 3 houses down, behind the sheer white curtains of a pristine bay window, Patricia Williams stood frozen with her coffee mug halfway to her lips, her eyes locked on this scene that was triggering every prejudice and fear she'd been carrying for decades. Patricia's mind was racing, and not in a good way. Her internal monologue was a stream of suspicious thoughts that revealed the ugly truth about her assumptions. "I've never seen him before," she thought, her grip tightening on her coffee mug. "That bike looks expensive, really expensive. Where would a kid like him get a bike like that?" The word "him" in her mind carried all the weight of her unconscious bias. She wasn't seeing a 12-year-old boy enjoying a beautiful morning. She was seeing a threat, a disruption to her sense of order and safety. Patricia tried to rationalize her growing anxiety. Part of her brain, the logical part that she usually ignored, was whispering that she was being paranoid. This was clearly just a kid enjoying his bike, probably from the neighborhood, definitely not doing anything wrong. But that rational voice was being drowned out by decades of programmed fear and prejudice that told her something wasn't right about this picture. Her heart was actually starting to race as she watched Marcus continue petting the dog. "He's probably casing the neighborhood," she told herself, building a narrative that had no basis in reality. "Testing to see which houses have dogs, which ones have security systems. That bike is probably stolen. I need to do something." Patricia made a decision that would change everything. She set her coffee mug down on her windowsill and headed for her front door, grabbing her watering can from the table in her entryway. If she was going to investigate this situation, she needed a reason to be outside, something that would look natural and innocent. Marcus had finished petting the golden retriever and was getting back on his bike when he noticed the blonde woman emerging from a house down the street. She was carrying a watering can and seemed to be heading toward the flower beds in her front yard, but something about her body language felt off. She kept glancing in his direction, and there was a tension in her posture that made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. But Marcus had been raised to be polite and respectful, especially to adults. When the woman looked directly at him, he did what his mother had taught him to do. He raised his hand in a friendly wave and called out with genuine warmth, "Good morning, ma'am. Beautiful day, isn't it?" The greeting hit Patricia like a slap in the face, but not because it was rude or threatening. It was the exact opposite. Marcus's voice was cheerful, respectful, and completely innocent. His smile was genuine, his wave enthusiastic, but not overly familiar. Everything about his demeanor contradicted the narrative Patricia had been building in her mind, and that contradiction made her even more uncomfortable. Patricia's prejudices had prepared her for a confrontation with someone sullen, aggressive, or suspicious. She wasn't prepared for a polite, well-spoken child who was clearly just enjoying a bike ride. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, but instead of making her question her assumptions, it made her double down on them. She managed a tight, forced smile and gave a small wave back, but her eyes never left Marcus or his bike. She positioned herself near her flower bed, where she could watch him without being obvious about it, pretending to water plants that didn't need watering while her anxiety continued to build. Marcus continued his ride, completely unaware that he was being studied like a specimen under a microscope. He stopped a few houses down to check his phone, wanting to text his mom to let her know he was having a great time on his first neighborhood ride. It was this innocent act that gave Patricia the opening she'd been waiting for. She set down her watering can and walked directly toward Marcus, her heart pounding, but her expression trying to remain casual and neighborly. When she was about 10 feet away, she called out in a voice that she hoped sounded friendly, but came across as slightly strained. "Excuse me, young man. I haven't seen you around here before. That's a very nice bike." Marcus looked up from his phone, startled but not alarmed. He'd been taught to be respectful to adults, and the woman seemed to be complimenting his bike, which made him proud. His face lit up with the same enthusiasm he'd shown his mother when he'd finally saved enough money to make his purchase. "Thank you," Marcus replied, his voice filled with genuine pride. "I saved up for 3 months to buy it. I live just 2 streets over with my mom." But instead of the positive response Marcus expected, he watched the woman's expression change in a way that confused him. Her smile seemed to freeze on her face, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she processed his answer. Patricia's suspicion intensified with every word Marcus spoke. Her logic was completely backwards, but she couldn't see it. In her mind, his polite, well-spoken responses were somehow proof that he was hiding something. "Really?" she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge that Marcus immediately noticed. "What's your mother's name? I know everyone in this neighborhood." Marcus started to feel the first tendrils of real discomfort. The woman's tone had changed completely, and there was something in her eyes that made him want to step back. But he'd been raised to answer adults' questions, so he replied honestly, though his voice was quieter now. Angela Thompson. We moved here 6 months ago." Patricia didn't recognize the name, which in her twisted logic confirmed her suspicions, rather than suggesting that maybe, just maybe, she didn't actually know everyone in a neighborhood of over 200 families. Her voice became more aggressive, and she took a step closer to Marcus, invading his personal space in a way that made him distinctly uncomfortable. "Where did you really get that bike?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. The implication was clear, and even at 12 years old, he understood what she was suggesting. His eyes widened, and for the first time in this interaction, he felt truly scared. His voice shook slightly as he answered, I bought it at Miller's. Mr. Miller can tell you." But Patricia was past the point of listening to reason. She'd convinced herself that she'd caught a young criminal in the act, and she was determined to follow through on her vigilante fantasy. Her voice was loud enough now that other neighbors might hear, and her body language was becoming increasingly aggressive. "Stay right there. Don't move." She pulled out her phone with the authority of someone who believed she was about to save the neighborhood from a dangerous threat. What happened next would haunt Patricia Williams for the rest of her life, though she didn't know it yet. She dialed 911, and when the dispatcher answered, Patricia's voice took on a tone of urgent concern that was completely disproportionate to the situation unfolding in front of her. "Hello, I need to report a suspicious person in our neighborhood. There's a young black male with what appears to be a stolen bicycle." The dispatcher, trained to gather accurate information, began asking the standard questions. "Can you describe the individual? What makes you believe the bicycle is stolen?" Patricia, now fully committed to her narrative, began embellishing details that would make the situation sound more serious than it actually was. "He can't explain where he got this expensive bike. He's being evasive and aggressive." Marcus could hear parts of the conversation, and each word felt like a punch to his stomach. Evasive? Aggressive? He'd answered every question politely and truthfully. He'd never been aggressive a day in his life. The confusion and fear on his face would have been heartbreaking to anyone with an ounce of empathy, but Patricia was too deep into her own delusion to see it. Marcus tried to get back on his bike, thinking that maybe if he just went home, this nightmare would end. But Patricia saw his movement and interpreted it as an attempt to flee, which in her mind confirmed his guilt. "Don't you dare move! The police are coming!" she shouted, loud enough that her voice echoed down the street. The commotion was beginning to attract attention. Neighbors started coming outside, some drawn by Patricia's raised voice, others by the sight of a clearly distressed child surrounded by an increasingly aggressive adult. Windows opened, curtains parted, and people stepped onto their porches, creating an audience for what was rapidly becoming a very public confrontation. Marcus felt trapped. He was surrounded by adults he didn't know, being accused of a crime he didn't commit, with a woman who seemed determined to treat him like a criminal no matter what he said. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and did the only thing a scared 12-year-old could think to do. He texted his mom. "Mom, help. A lady called the police on me. I'm scared." 20 minutes across town, Chief Angela Thompson was sitting in a budget meeting with the city council, discussing funding for new community policing initiatives. She was explaining the importance of building trust between law enforcement and the communities they served when her phone buzzed with Marcus's text message. The blood drained from Angela's face as she read those words. Every parent's worst nightmare had just become her reality, but for Angela, it was even worse. As a black mother and a police chief, she understood exactly what was happening to her son, and she knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. Angela stood up from the conference table so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. The city council members looked at her in surprise as she grabbed her keys and headed for the door. "Chief Thompson, where are you going?" "We're in the middle of discussing your budget proposal," called out Councilman Peters. Angela paused at the door, her hand on the handle, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel that made everyone in the room understand this was not a request. "My son needs me. We'll have to continue this meeting later." And with that, Chief Angela Thompson left the room, knowing she was about to face every fear she'd ever had about raising a black child in America, even in a neighborhood she'd chosen specifically because she thought it would be safe. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the ugly truth about assumptions, prejudice, and the power of unconscious bias in the most dramatic way possible. The sound of sirens piercing the Saturday morning calm sent a chill through the entire neighborhood. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars turned onto Elm Street, their red and blue lights flashing as they approached the growing crowd surrounding a 12-year-old boy on a bicycle. This was the moment Patricia Williams had been waiting for, the moment she believed she would be vindicated for her vigilance and concern for neighborhood safety. Officers Rodriguez and Kelly stepped out of their vehicles with the practiced professionalism that comes from years of police work. These weren't rookie cops responding to a routine call. Officer Maria Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran who had worked her way up from patrol to community liaison, and Officer James Kelly was a 12-year veteran known throughout the department for his calm demeanor and ability to de-escalate tense situations. Both officers knew Chief Thompson personally, had worked under her leadership for years, and respected her both as their superior and as a colleague who had earned every promotion through dedication and excellence. But they had no idea they were about to walk into a situation involving their chief's son. Patricia practically ran toward the officers as they approached, her voice breathless with the excitement of someone who believed she was about to be proven right. "Thank goodness you're here. He claims he lives in the neighborhood, but I've never seen him before. I've been watching him for 20 minutes, and something just doesn't add up." The officers listened to Patricia's rapid-fire explanation while simultaneously assessing the actual situation in front of them. What they saw was a clearly terrified child surrounded by a growing crowd of adults, some supportive, some hostile, all focused on him with an intensity that would be overwhelming for anyone, let alone a 12-year-old. Officer Rodriguez approached Marcus with the kind of gentle professionalism that had made her successful in community policing. Her voice was calm, non-threatening, designed to make a scared child feel safer rather than more afraid. "Hey there, son. Can you tell us your name?" Marcus was trembling now, the full weight of the situation crushing down on him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding with a neighbor anymore. This was police officers, patrol cars, flashing lights, and a crowd of people all staring at him like he was some kind of criminal. His voice was barely above a whisper when he answered, "Marcus Thompson. I live on Maple Street with my mom." The name hit both officers like a lightning bolt, but before they could process what they'd just heard, Patricia jumped back into the conversation with even more intensity than before. "He says his mother is someone named Angela Thompson, but there's no Angela Thompson in this neighborhood. I've lived here for 6 months, and I know everyone." Officers Rodriguez and Kelly exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They knew exactly who Angela Thompson was. They'd served under her command, attended her community meetings, and heard her give speeches about the importance of treating every citizen with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background. The irony of this situation was not lost on either of them. Officer Kelly stepped slightly away from the group and keyed his radio, his voice carefully controlled as he spoke into his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, can you patch us through to Chief Thompson? We have a situation involving her son." The radio crackled to life with the dispatcher's voice. "Did you say Chief Thompson's son? Stand by. We'll attempt contact immediately." But Patricia, oblivious to the significance of what was happening around her, continued to press her case. More neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the police presence and the unusual commotion on what should have been a quiet Saturday morning. The crowd was growing, and with it, the complexity of the situation. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly black woman who lived 4 houses down from Patricia, pushed through the crowd with the determined stride of someone who had something important to say. Her voice cut through the chatter with the authority of someone who had lived through enough injustice to recognize it when she saw it. "I know that boy. He helped me carry my groceries last week when I was struggling with my arthritis. Sweet as can be, polite as they come. His mama raised him right." Mrs. Henderson's words should have been enough to diffuse the situation, but Patricia was too deep into her narrative to back down now. Mr. Patel, a soft-spoken man who lived next door to Patricia, tried to inject some reason into the increasingly chaotic scene. "Patricia, maybe we should let the officers handle this. They're trained professionals, and this seems like it might be a misunderstanding." But Patricia was doubling down, her voice rising with defensive anger as she felt her authority being questioned. "I have every right to protect our neighborhood. Property values and safety are everyone's concern. If we don't stay vigilant, this whole area will go downhill fast." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing the ugly truth behind Patricia's actions. This wasn't really about a stolen bike or suspicious behavior. This was about fear, prejudice, and a need to maintain what Patricia saw as the proper order of things. Meanwhile, the modern age was making itself known in ways that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Neighbors who had initially come outside just to see what was happening were now pulling out their phones, recording the scene, and posting to neighborhood social media apps. The hashtags were already starting to form: Willowbrook bias, police called on child, bike riding while black. Videos were being uploaded to Facebook groups, Instagram stories, and TikTok accounts faster than anyone at the scene could have imagined. The story was spreading beyond the physical boundaries of Willowbrook Heights and into the digital sphere where it would take on a life of its own. Marcus stood in the center of all this chaos, overwhelmed by the attention and accusations swirling around him. This was supposed to be a fun bike ride, a celebration of months of hard work and saving. Instead, he found himself at the center of a confrontation he didn't understand, surrounded by adults arguing about him as if he wasn't even there. Officers Rodriguez and Kelly were doing their best to maintain order while they waited for Chief Thompson to arrive, But the situation was becoming increasingly complex with each passing minute. They knew they were walking a tightrope, trying to respect Patricia's right to call for police assistance while also recognizing that Marcus was clearly not a threat to anyone. 20 minutes across town, Chief Angela Thompson was driving through the city with her emergency lights flashing, her mind racing through every worst-case scenario a mother could imagine. Her radio crackled with updates from the scene, each one making her heart pound harder. "Chief, your son appears to be fine. Situation is complicated. We have a crowd gathering, and the caller is persistent in her claims." Angela's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she processed the coded language her officers were using. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to read between the lines. Persistent caller meant someone who wasn't backing down despite evidence to the contrary. Complicated situation meant racial undertones that her officers were trying to navigate carefully. As she drove through the streets she'd patrolled for 2 decades, Angela's mind was flooded with memories and emotions she'd tried to keep compartmentalized. 20 years of fighting bias in the system, 20 years of proving herself over and over again, 20 years of working to change policing from the inside, and now it was her own son being targeted by the very prejudices she'd spent her career fighting. The irony was crushing. She'd moved to Willowbrook Heights specifically to give Marcus the kind of safe, privileged childhood she'd never had. She'd worked double shifts and saved every penny to afford a house in a neighborhood where she thought her son could ride his bike without fear, where his biggest worry would be homework and video games, not whether someone would see him as a threat simply because of the color of his skin. But as she turned onto Elm Street and saw the patrol cars, the crowd of neighbors, and her son standing in the middle of it all looking small and scared, Angela realized that there was no neighborhood nice enough, no achievement high enough, no uniform impressive enough to shield her child from the reality of being black in America. The sight that greeted Chief Thompson as she stepped out of her car would be burned into her memory forever. Her son, the boy she'd kissed goodbye that morning with instructions to have fun and be safe, surrounded by patrol cars and a crowd of adults, some defending him, some accusing him, all treating him like the subject of a debate rather than a 12-year-old child who just wanted to ride his bike. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change not just this one Saturday morning, but potentially the entire dynamic of Willowbrook Heights and everyone who called it home. What happened next unfolded like a scene from a movie, except this was real life, with real consequences, and real people whose lives were about to be forever changed by the truth. Chief Angela Thompson stepped out of her unmarked police vehicle, and the first thing everyone noticed was her uniform. This wasn't just any police officer responding to a call. The insignia on her shoulders, the authority in her bearing, and the way she carried herself made it immediately clear that this was someone of significant rank and importance. The moment Officers Rodriguez and Kelly saw their chief approaching, their training kicked in. Both officers immediately straightened to attention and delivered crisp salutes that echoed across the suddenly quiet street. "Good afternoon, Chief," Officer Rodriguez called out, her voice carrying the respect and formality that protocol demanded when addressing a superior officer. The crowd that had been buzzing with conversation and speculation went completely silent. The only sounds were the distant hum of air conditioning units and the gentle rustle of leaves in the oak trees that lined the street. Everyone was trying to process what they were seeing, but none more so than Patricia Williams. Patricia's face was a picture of confusion as she looked from the officers to the woman in uniform and back again. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she asked the question that revealed just how completely she had misunderstood the situation. "Chief? Chief of what?" Officer Rodriguez turned to face Patricia directly, her voice clear and professional as she delivered the words that would shatter Patricia's entire worldview in a single sentence. "Ma'am, this is Police Chief Angela Thompson, Marcus's mother." The color drained from Patricia's face so quickly that several neighbors later said they thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she could form words, and when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with disbelief and dawning horror. That's impossible. But Chief Thompson wasn't focused on Patricia's shock or the crowd's reaction. Her entire attention was on her son, who was still standing next to his bicycle, looking small and scared in the middle of this adult chaos. Angela walked directly to Marcus, her stern professional demeanor melting away as she reached out to embrace her child. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft with the kind of maternal concern that transcended rank, uniform, and authority. Marcus fell into his mother's arms, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt safe. Tears that he'd been holding back for the past hour finally began to flow as he buried his face in his mother's shoulder. "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just riding my bike," Marcus said, his voice muffled but filled with the confusion and hurt that every parent dreads hearing from their child. Chief Thompson held her son for a long moment, letting him feel secure and protected before she turned to address the situation that had traumatized him. When she finally looked up at Patricia, her expression had transformed back into that of a seasoned law enforcement professional, but now there was something else in her eyes, something that made everyone in the crowd understand that this was about to become a very different kind of confrontation. Her voice was calm, but carried an authority that made everyone lean in to listen. This wasn't shouting or anger. This was the controlled power of someone who had spent 20 years learning how to command respect and attention. "Ma'am, I understand you called 911 because you believed my son had stolen property?" Patricia was flustered now. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated as she tried to explain actions that suddenly seemed inexplicable even to herself. Her words came out in a jumbled rush as she grasped for justification. I've never seen him before, and that bike looked expensive, and I was trying to protect the neighborhood." Chief Thompson let Patricia's words hang in the air for a moment before responding with a question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "So, you assumed that a black child in your neighborhood with a nice bike must be a criminal?" The question hit the crowd like a physical blow. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, others nodded in recognition of the ugly truth that had just been laid bare. Patricia's response revealed just how deep her prejudices ran, even as she tried to deny them. "No, I was protecting the community. I had no idea he was your son." Chief Thompson's next question would be quoted in news articles, social media posts, and community discussions for months to come. It was delivered with the precision of a seasoned interrogator and the moral authority of someone who had dedicated her life to justice. Would it matter if he wasn't? Would that make your assumptions acceptable? The crowd watched in stunned silence as Patricia realized the full implications of her actions and her words. There was no good answer to Chief Thompson's question because the truth was undeniable. Patricia had made assumptions based on race, had called the police on an innocent child, and had been prepared to see him treated as a criminal simply because she couldn't imagine that a black family belonged in her neighborhood. But Chief Thompson wasn't finished. She turned to address the entire crowd, using this moment as a teaching opportunity that would resonate far beyond this single incident. This is exactly why we have community policing initiatives. This is why we talk about unconscious bias in our training. This is why building trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve isn't just a nice idea. It's essential for justice. Her words carried the weight of someone who had lived on both sides of this equation, who understood what it felt like to be profiled and also understood the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. Patricia, to her credit, seemed to genuinely understand the gravity of what she had done. When she spoke again, her voice was shaky but sincere. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong to assume the worst. I let my fears override my judgment, and I'm truly ashamed of my actions." Chief Thompson looked down at Marcus, who was still standing close to her side, and spoke to him in a voice that the entire crowd could hear. "What do you think, sweetheart? Mrs. Williams has apologized for making a mistake. Do you think people can learn from their mistakes and become better?" Marcus looked up at his mother, then at Patricia, and then back at the crowd of neighbors who had been arguing about him just minutes earlier. With the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children, he nodded. I think so, but I hope she'll get to know people before she decides they're bad. Chief Thompson announced that she would be organizing a community meeting within the week to discuss how Willowbrook Heights could become a place where all residents felt welcome and safe. She emphasized that building a strong community required everyone to examine their own biases and work together to create an environment of mutual respect. As the crowd began to disperse, something beautiful happened. Mrs. Henderson approached Marcus and asked if he'd like to help her in her garden sometime. Mr. Patel mentioned that his son was about Marcus's age and invited him to come over and play video games. Other neighbors who had remained silent during the confrontation now stepped forward to introduce themselves properly. If you've made it this far in this incredible story, please hit that subscribe button because we bring you these powerful, real-life stories that reveal important truths about our society every single day. I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think is the most important lesson from Marcus and Chief Thompson's experience? Share your perspective in the comments below. The final image of that Saturday morning was one that would stick with everyone who witnessed it. Marcus Thompson, riding his red and black mountain bike freely through the streets of Willowbrook Heights, waving to neighbors who now waved back with genuine warmth and recognition. The same bike that had been the source of suspicion and conflict was now simply what it had always been, a symbol of a young boy's hard work, determination, and dreams. Chief Thompson followed behind in her car, not because she was worried about Marcus's safety anymore, but because she wanted to see him experience the joy and freedom that every child deserves when they're simply being a kid in their own neighborhood. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the most uncomfortable moments. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the prejudices we didn't even know we carried. And sometimes, just sometimes, those painful moments of truth can become the foundation for building something better. Marcus Thompson never forgot that Saturday morning, but he also never forgot how his community came together afterward to ensure that no other child would have to experience what he went through. And Patricia Williams became one of the most vocal advocates for the community bias training programs that Chief Thompson implemented in the months that followed. The bike that started it all still sits in the Thompson family garage, though Marcus has long since outgrown it. Chief Thompson kept it as a reminder that even in our safest spaces, we must remain vigilant, not against our neighbors, but against the prejudices and assumptions that can turn neighbors into strangers and children into suspects. Because in the end, this story isn't really about a bike or a phone call or even a case of mistaken identity. It's about the choice we all have to make every single day. Will we see each other as fellow human beings worthy of respect and dignity, or will we let our fears and prejudices divide us from the very people who could become our greatest allies and friends? The answer to that question determines not just the kind of neighborhood we live in, but the kind of world we're building for the next generation of children who just want to ride their bikes in peace.